Hello and welcome to the Varietal Show. If you've never been here before, my name is Rory, and you are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel, which is a cozy little corner of the internet where we play around with narrative. And what we do here on Thursday nights on the Varietal Show is we play solo tabletop RPGs and by a billion other genre names, usually indie kind of stuff, and we try to form a story out of it. And this is the second part. Though I don't think it's super crucial that you watch the first part unless you're interested a little more in the explanation of the rules. But it is the second part of a playthrough that we're doing with it. I will reread the section that we wrote from last time, so if you're just worried about narrative, keeping up with that, don't worry about it. Going back and watching the other one if you don't want to. It was a little long because there was a few more rules than usual to explain. Anyways, this time the promise is that we will get more to the core of the gameplay because we've kind of explained all the rules in the last one, and so we will get right to crawling those dungeons with our stinky little hobbit. I do want to mention that tonight's game is brought to us by Witchery, who is in the chat right now. Hello, Witchery. Also, hello, GS, Tammy, and Jump Store. I don't see Zombie Wolf yet, but I'm sure I will. Unless I burned their feelings because I left before the random fact last Tuesday. There was reason for that. I got a message on my phone I had to deal with ASAP. So I kind of had to duck out quick. But anyways, if you don't want to hear any of this, by the way, one of the great benefits to not watching this live is down in the description below. There will be timestamps that jump you to the major points in the stream. So you can just go to whatever section you're interested the most. If you just want to know what we came up with, you can do that. There will be a timestamp for that. If you just want to get to the rules or the starting of the writing, you can do that. If you are here live, obviously you can't jump ahead, but what you can do is join in the live chat where folks are already talking. And that's really quite a bit of fun, I think, in a game like this, because you're going to kind of be my DM, kind of be players. Because as we get prompts, I'm going to be consulting chat to help interpret them. Chat helped me create the characters for this game. It's a collaborative play in its own way, even though it is technically solo, and I get the final say. Anyhow, let me dance around to the best song on this playlist. Okay. Let me actually do the thing that people are here to watch. Witchery says, you got to sneak in the old like and subscribe. I just don't know that he even matters. Like, okay, before I go into the game, let me just say this. Is there really enough people into A, tabletop RPGs, B, solo tabletop RPGs, and C, with the attention span to watch me type in a Google Doc, that it's worth playing the algorithm? I just don't think there is. I think a lot of people duck in if they're interested in the game, and a few people like the vibes and hang out. Which is fine with me. You know, I don't think I ever really thought I was going to be like a famous streamer. I mostly just enjoyed the company while playing these games that interested me. But if you like the stream, like it. All right, enough fooling around. Let me get to the game. This part of the show is called litgames. Litgames stands for literature games, which is my sort of catch, my catch-all term for like solo tabletop RPGs, lyric games, solo journaling games, things like that. Anyways, this game in particular is a game that is put together by a person who runs a podcast where they play, I believe, solo, maybe old school tabletop RPG, if you know that movement. It's like a proper noun term for it. that is called, it's reasonably popular for the niche it's in. I haven't really watched it. I mentioned last stream that I have a really hard time paying attention to Let's Plays of tabletop RPGs, quite ironically. I like to create things and I get fidgety if I can't. But anyways, it's apparently quite good. It's called The Tale of the Manticore, I believe. I saw it on Spotify. At some point, I'm going to have to listen to at least an episode because I'm playing their game. Anyways, it's called One Shot in the Dark. They call it Rules Light. I don't think it's super Rules Light. They actually call it Ultra Rules Light. It's lighter on the rules, but there's definitely lighter rule systems. I don't mean that as a negative thing, though. I think it has the right amount of rules. I mentioned this last time. To still feel like there are decisions involved with consequences, and that's engaging, right? Witchery and I were talking last time about how sometimes games are just so rules light, you wonder, why am I even playing it? I could just write a short story on my own. And we got into a deep dive of a lot of the rules last week and how the characters are built. I'm going to do a super fast re-description, which is still going to take like 5 minutes, of the rules because I don't think people are going to remember it. Then I'm going to reread you. I did some editing on it. I'm going to reread you the section that we wrote together last week. And then we're going to pick right up describing the fight that we rolled through last week, but we didn't describe. So that's what we're doing. Tammy says, I love watching and participating. And I love having you guys here and participating. I'm certainly not naysaying that people enjoy it. Witchery says, fun YouTube fact. People are more likely to like and subscribe with a verbal call to action, but not at the end of the video. Somewhere mid-video is better. Yes, indeed. YouTube has a little dashboard that lectures me on what I should be doing every week. Maybe I should listen to it. I don't know. Right. Jumpstore gasp. Roy, I'm offended you even have to ask. I actually forgot what I asked. Oh, you mean like and subscribe? I don't know. Okay. Let's get into this. Okay, so the way this system works, you need some dice and you need some cards. If you didn't watch last week, we're going to do this pretty quick. You need to split your deck of regular playing cards. We have our counterfeit Kirby deck that was bought at a sketchy night market, but has wonderful Kirby art on every card. You need to split it into its suits and then shuffle each of those suits. So you have 4 piles before you. Hearts is like the dungeon crawling aspect. We'll pull a hearts card. It gives us a prompt from a list that will tell us some prompts, whether enemies are there, roughly what the room is. It's very vague on purpose because we need to fill in the blanks and describe what actually happens in that room. As we get descriptions of rooms, we add to our dungeon. Now, we started a dungeon last week. Unfortunately, this dungeon does not save between plays, so this may not look exactly the same as last week, but it is roughly the same. We're in a big cavern right now fighting rats. It had, I believe, 3 entrances out. So I've redrawn some approximation of that. And when we get our next room, after we pick a direction here, we will draw another part of the dungeon based on the hearts deck. Now and then the hearts deck will call for enemies and things like that. That's the diamonds deck. And it also gives us a list of things. And we already had an enemy encounter that required us to pull from the diamonds deck. And what we got was 4 diseased rats. Okay. There are clubs and spades portions of the deck. And that's like items and such. I think actually one of these doesn't do anything, but maybe I'm misremembering. There's concern in the chat that I didn't, that she's not coming because I didn't post a random fact. I mean, it's possible, but I've missed it before, and that wasn't reason enough to stop. People get busy. I don't think we need to worry. Okay, so we have our characters. Unlike D&D, 5e, I should say, a lot of D&D systems even, but not all of them. You don't roll a d20 and add your abilities, and the amount you add determines your character. Instead, we start with a team. It's predefined. There's a warrior, a cleric, a thief, and a wizard, and they all have unique abilities and a unique dice, well, except for the thief and cleric, which have the same dice. And the way it works is you roll that dice to see if they hit in combat, and then if you do hit, you roll again to see that same dice to see how much damage they do. And it's quite clever and lean, right? Because, you know, obviously a wizard is the least likely to hit with its d4, and it does the least amount of damage. But wizards also can cast a spell, which I'll remind you guys how that works in a moment. The way that hits work in this game is that 1 to 3 never hits, and 4 and above always hits. So it's not an AC thing. It's not like a game, actually, maybe I'll talk more about this stream, that I don't plan to play on stream because it's too crunchy, but it is fun, called Ironsworn. It's not like that where you roll dice and you get varying challenge levels based on the dice you roll. It's just a stable AC, if you want to think of it that way. Anything below 3 and below doesn't hit. Sure, he had to rush off for a reason. Who had to rush off for a reason? Oh, I had to rush off for... Yes, I did. You can see Rory fail his concentration save every time he looks at the chat. LMAO. Isn't that part of the game? Isn't that why about most people are here at Jumpstore? GS is referring to me. Anyways, the 2d4s, d6, and a d8 is our whole team. And the way initiative works in combat is we always go first, the enemies go second. The enemies have their own dice, their attack and damage dice, which are always the same. And they will roll for us, and it's the same rules, 1 to 3. As far as how damage gets delivered, we decide where the damage goes. It can only go to one person, but we decide where they go. Dead is dead. As far as I know, there's no revive mechanics, but there is mechanics to bring another person into that role into your team. Yeah, I think that's all the quiet, the combat mechanics is rather what I'm thinking of. Yeah. The only other things that you need to know is that the thief can do some things that other characters can't do. So if you lose your thief, traps spring automatically. You don't really have a lot of options for opening doors, things like that. So thief has special abilities, and clerics and wizards can cast spells. There's a spell list for each of them, which we looked at last week. You can pick one spell per level up. But once you use a spell, it's spent. Once you use a spell, it's spent. So we gave our cleric heal, and we gave our wizard knock. Heal does what it sounds like. It heals a person, and knock, if you know D&D, you know what that does. It just opens a locked door. Tammy says, it's okay, GS, I don't think they will be offended. Well, I don't think they'll be offended because they weren't talking about them. I think Jumpstore's concern was, were we misgendering Zombie Wolf, but we weren't. We were talking about me. But I appreciate the confusion because I also got confused. The HP is determined by your dice. On level up, you roll that dice again, you heal to your max HP, and then you roll that dice again, you add whatever you rolled to your health pool. The yeah. And then there's items that can buff us. We haven't found any items yet, so we'll deal with that when we get there. So that's the gist of it. We draw cards that gives us a room when there's combat. That's how combat works. The only other thing to mention is checks. Occasionally, we haven't run into a check yet, but if we run into a check, you're supposed to roll a d20, and on a 1 to 10 you fail, and 11 to 20 you succeed. But that's just a 50-50. I'm not too sure why you're using a d20 there, unless later, because there are some mechanics where you roll a d20 and if you get a 1 you get a problem. Like we're fighting diseased rats. When we get hit, whoever gets hit rolls a d20, and on a 1 they get a disease. Anyways, the coin flip is the same. So instead, for the ability checks, GS says, I don't want to be able to use the spell, only use the spell once. It's good for this system, but yeah, most systems let you reuse your spells, so it's interesting in that way. But anyways, so if we get a check, which for the most part, thieves are the ones doing these checks, we'll basically flip a coin. Blue is success, red is failure, and it's our Metroid coin if you haven't seen it before. It's Samus looking at all the happy animals she saved. And then Samus as a skull under a helmet because she let all the animals die. And if you know Metroid, you'll know what that means. And if you don't worry about it. Okay. Let's get to it. I'm going to read you back what we came up with last time. We'll see how long I can make it. Until I have to turn on my air conditioning. Okay, so our team, again, was... Our cleric is Reverend Hubert Leebody, human, nearsighted, shy, and quiet in speech. Our warrior was Epimetheus Goliath, who was a Goliath. It's a race in D&D. Well, more than D&D, but... I know the versions from D&D best. Intricately braided red hair, easy to laughter / violence. I guess I didn't actually make him that way. He's kind of dour, actually. Dour and brooding. Our thief was Karafi, who goes by the nickname Nice. Was an elf, cocky and friendly, short but handsome in the face. Wizard was Galen Blackwood, who is, we decided was the one who was going to hire all of the rest of the team for an expedition. He's a city kid or a city boy who teaches in a university or whatever else. Anyways, he's a hobbit. He's hungry constantly. He's stinky. And we said he was buff, but I haven't actually had a chance to work that in yet, and I may not be able to. It doesn't come up. Anyways, he's a wizard. Okay, let's read what we came up with last week, and then we'll continue it. The first indication a stranger was in Epimetheus's favorite tavern was the pungent odor of expensive cheese. No one in the town of Valenheim had the money or will to splurge on moldy cheese from the big city. They ate the carrots and turnips that grew plentiful in their farms. The main populace of this simple village down at the rural foot of the Razor Peak Range were simple laborers, generally farmers. Epimetheus was a native born to the small city, and so he had drunk many pints there between the walls of the Bardenleed Tavern. He had not been here in a while. Since he had not been here since he became a soldier, though. With the defeat of his king, he could now only count himself as a mercenary. Still, After all those years marching against nameless nations, he still remembered what was normal for the Bardenlead pub in Stinky cheese was not normal. He searched the tavern either for the source of the stink or for the halfling wizard who had hired him. He figured they were likely the same, and was proven right when his searching eyes landed on a hobbit in the far corner. He was in a stained robe, with his bare feet kicked up on a stack of books, turning pages with his left hand and biting off chunks of cheese held by his right. Epimetheus pulled the tattered book from his pocket, from his pocket, scribbled at the bottom of it, after the traditional missives you would say to a mercenary for hire, was the name Galen Blackwood. Epimetheus marched over and slid into the bench, across from the feasting hobbit. The hobbit didn't seem to notice his arrival. Epimetheus said, "You're Galen, right?" Galen startled from his reading, kicking a stack of old tomes onto the floor as he swung upright to meet the gaze of Epimetheus. "Oh my," Galen said, erupting with a pungent burp, then continued, "You are twice as large as I expected, which is good. We are going towards dangerous folk, after all. A big heavy arm swinging a big heavy stick is exactly why you were recommended, Epidermis." Epimetheus, he corrected with a furrow of his brow that pulled his intricate red braids forward. Failing to read the room, Galen snorted, "Of course, that's what I said." Epimetheus had a sharp word or two that he wished to loose upon this stinky little hobbit, but before his better judgment could fail, as this was, after all, his new employer, the door swung open and interrupted him. In stepped an elf of an unusually short stature with a wide grin. She turned to the tavern keep and in a boisterous voice said, "I found me a mumbling monk who apparently shares my employer, fair keeper, and that means I seek for him on both our behalf." The slender elf dipped in a dramatic bow towards the tavern keep. The tavern keeper chewed at the tobacco leaf in his cheek for a moment, then said, "What?" The elf, clearly a bit crestfallen that her appearance hadn't made the desired impression, rephrased and said, "Galen, myself and this man." She turned, but stopped when she saw no one behind her. With a frustrated frown, she swung the door back open to reveal a nervous-robed man, his raiment betraying him a cleric of one of the ascetic orders, leaning his ear against the now-absent door. She scolded, "Why didn't you follow me like we agreed?" Sorry, Karafi," the cleric muttered. Karafi grabbed the cloak of the cleric and pulled him into the tavern, continuing her conversation with the disinterested tavern keeper. "We are looking for a Galen, She checked the wrinkled note in her left hand. "Something wood." "Blackwood!" Galen shouted from the table where he sat with Epimetheus. He waved the young elvish rogue and her shuffling cleric compatriot over. The gregarious elf looked between the small hobbit covered in crumbs of cheese and the fire-haired Goliath with knees rising above the table line for a moment, then exclaiming, "Talk about a size difference." "That's why I've hired you," exclaimed the hobbit, "because each of you is something I am not." For the next 2 hours, Galen Blackwood, a renowned wizard and researcher of the arcane orders, lectured his hired team on the various strange magical phenomena that interested him. Each statement about his field of study led to side statements clarifying some obscure word using ever more obscure words, which led to yet more clarifications on the statement that was clarifying a statement, and so on. These spider webs of thoughts that spilled from the self-assured little creature amounted to disinterest from his company, who really just needed some work and had little concern for the purpose of the journey. They were going to a cave at the base of the Razor Peaks to lead some city professor through a cave, hopefully without getting him killed. Still, none of the hirees were dumb enough to interrupt their employer, but none was committed enough to listen either. In the end, all that really mattered to them was the goal, which was some magic artifact presumably located in this cavern at the foot of the Razor Peak Mountains. The bit they did glean from his long speech. In no small part, because the little wizard conjured visuals for it, is that a recent earthquake revealed the entrance to these lost tunnels under the Razor Peak Mountains. It took Galen 2 hours to say this, which did not bode well for the ambiance of the rest of the party's journey. The night came swiftly, and Galen paid out for the meals and drinks. The next morning, and for a few days after, the group hiked north, up towards the Razor Peaks. Galen would speak until the road grew steep, and then he would just wheeze. The next most talkative was Karafi, or Niece, as she insisted she be called. She dealt mostly in jokes and occasionally cutting comments on the traits of her peers, which was not appreciated by the brooding Epimetheus. The cleric, who after 2 days of hiking finally admitted his name was Hubert Leabody, never spoke except to apologize for things no one ever need apologize for, such as someone walking into a spiderweb 15 feet away from him. Everyone was silent, though, when they finally reached the fissure at the base of the Razor Peaks. The silence persisted as they climbed down into a strange and awesome cavern. It was a great bubble of stone, with a still shallow lake and a ceiling hung with long stalactites that drooled from high above, each mineral-rich drop building up the stalagmites below them. The walls, though mostly obscured by stone and slime from an age of isolation, revealed the hand-hewn marks of some ancient language. "This was a temple!" shouted Galen with little sense of the dangers roots of mountains often host. Galen whipped up into a careless ecstasy because he was not as experienced as his hirees with exploring living relics. He ran to the nearest wall, and before each of his compatriots could scream a chorus of warning, he ran his pudgy, mustard-stained forefinger down the groove of a hewn rune in the wall. It immediately burned with red fire that spread across the visible runes of the wide space. For a breath, there was nothing more than that. Then the wide chamber filled with sickly, twisting light. The source was a cerulean portal glowing from under the cavern lake ahead. It dimmed again, and again the cave went dark. Bursting forth from the clear waters came pustule-ridden rats, possessed by a hunger and rage. Epimetheus stepped forward and drew his long silver blade. He grunted, "Stay back." "Oh, I'll be fine," Galen chuckled. "I practiced for this in the Adventuring in You seminar. Why, it's just a few rats who are nothing more than a bit larger than normal." And so the fight ensued. Oh, I see Zombie Wolf is here. Zombie Wolf, the chat was showing its anxious colors. They were certain you would never return again. It's good to see you. We were discussing about how your fun fact got cut off. And I was explaining, although I can't really give any details on this, I was explaining that right near the end of the stream, I saw a message on my phone that I had to deal with pretty much right away, so I had to duck out quite quick. But we will double up your fun trivia as an apology. Apparently you're making trelech cupcakes. Ooh, yummy. Ran out of condensed milk. Oh, you're doing it like from scratch? Cupcakes were also late. Oh, you have an arcade? That's fun. It's really hard to have a friend move. I mean, it's definitely easier in the internet age, but yeah, I remember when my friend moved. I was in my 20s. It just felt like a weird abandonment. And you were like, come on, you want your friends to be happy. You want to move on, them to move on to places they're happy. But it was hard to ignore. It was very kind of you to make cupcakes. Okay. Well, we already rolled this fight. And this room is already sticky and humid, so we're turning on the air conditioning for a little bit. Sorry for headphone users, you will hear a little bit. Just doing something with my headphones a second. Witchery says, back in ye olden times, someone moved one town over and you likely lost them for good. Especially if you were like a kid who couldn't drive. Yeah. Okay. So the fight we rolled was 4 giant rats. I guess what I meant was, are you making, with dulce de leche? Like, are you doing the 8 hours of cooking the condensed milk yourself? Or were you buying it pre-done? I'm lucky. I have a sous vide. And you can do this trick with a sous vide where you take condensed milk and you just put the whole can unopened into the water bath for a sous vide for the amount of time. And it just turns it into dulce de leche, which I'm sure is not how it's pronounced, by the way. Sorry, I wasn't clear. I understand that you could make cupcakes from scratch. We've established our love of cooking. Calls used to cost so much money. Yeah, I think even into the cell phone era, I think probably my biggest I walked uphill both ways moment as I get older is how cell phones used to work. Because it was insane. Witcher says, you do that on the stove too, but you can't forget about... Yeah, the nice thing about the sous vide method is it's never going to overheat. But yeah, it's a lot easier. And you don't have to keep it off the base, which is a bit of a problem because it can get to the metal and then overheat. And then, as you say, kaboom. Okay. So let me talk you through the technical aspects of the fight. We rolled 4 giant filth rats. You are making the dulce de leche from scratch. Well, that's a true friend. For those who don't know, I think most people probably know. Dulce de leche is when you take condensed milk, which you buy in a can, and you cook it at a very specific temperature for a very long time. At least for cooking. And if you're doing it old school, where you just pour the condensed milk into a pot, not in the can or whatever else, you have to stir it for the whole 3 hours it takes. And what happens is the milk caramelizes and turns into a kind of caramel sauce. It is tedious, but it is, as Witchery points out, delicious. Okay, so we had 4 giant filth rats. They each had 3 health. They were rolling a d4 for their damage, and they were diseased, which meant that whenever somebody took damage from them, we rolled a d20, and on a 1, they got a disease, which was described in their stat block. We killed a rat in the first round. 1 rat bit Galen in the second round. We decided it was Galen, because Galen's kind of an idiot. Kind of an idiot. He's a lot of an idiot. But he did not get diseased. In our next round, we killed 2 rats, and the rats missed us. And then in the final round, we killed the last rat. Most of this killing was done from Epimetheus, though it's up to us how we want to describe it. Zombie Wolf says, my noticed passion is cooking. She says the mark of a true Sicilian is the ability to make everything with love. Well, the mark of a true cook is the ability to put that kind of care in your work. Cooking is so much a culmination. The difference between a good dish and a great dish is a culmination of weird little details you wouldn't do unless you had good passion and love for it. And yeah, that's what Zombie Wolf says. Yeah, that means no shortcut. Yeah, it's easier just to say. I mean, the way I like to put it is the secret ingredient to a great dish is the chef's hands. And then I love taking that too literally and making a joke about cannibalism. But yeah. Now and then, though, a shortcut does about the same. I will say. I will admit. Sometimes it's not worth the effort. Could you hand whip whipping cream instead of using, like, if you have the money in ISI, which charges, or a KitchenAid that whips it, you could. It actually comes out worse. Sorry to hear you don't have the energy for cooking, Witchery. I don't really have the energy for cooking, but I don't really have a choice, because I'm a celiac and you have to make everything from scratch. Okay, let's describe this fight. And the fight ensued. Okay. Galen swiped at... I want to give a kill to Nice. Zombie Wolf, tell me how Nice would kill a rat. These are big diseased rats. If you really don't think she's going to kill a rat, though, you can let me know. Galen swiped... No, not Galen. Epimetheus. Gotta remember this. There we go. Yeah, that's happened a few times recently, Witchery. You know what I do like, Witchery, if I don't have time, is baked potatoes. Because there's a lot of flexibility and they don't require me to stand around and do anything. Throwing daggers or poison needles, a stealthy clean kill. The nice thing about this game is it doesn't really restrict, you know, what kind of equipment you might have on you. So yeah, absolutely, we can do that. The first one's going to be Epimetheus. He was up front. Epimetheus. I'm doing that thing. If you've ever watched an animator work, my partner's an animator, so I watch her friends do this. I'm doing that thing where you sort of imitate what you're trying to do with your body to think about. Well, they do how you draw it, but I do it with writing too. Epimetheus plunged his silver blade down with a stomp. There was a crunch. And squeal. As the rat, big as a hound, was skewered. Three more were swimming were crawling to shore. Rhyme, that was not intentional, but I'm leaving it. GS says poison the rats, Trelech. Witchery says, would you die at 40 for butter? Hell yeah. Butter's great. GS says a crunch and a squeal faints. Yeah, that's true, Zombie Wolf. Cheese is just butter by another name. Cheese, butter, and chocolate are effectively the same thing. They just have different flavorings. Aw. Witchery says, my cat came back just to sit on my stationery and cry. So, this is probably not worth me describing, and I should get back to work. But here's my kitty description of the day. My cat, Smudge, who we've rarely seen on the stream because he doesn't really come over here, but he is currently lying up in that corner in our window well. We have an air conditioner that sits on the ground and has a big tube up to the window. It's very inefficient. Don't recommend them at all. But that inefficiency is what he loves about it, because that tube to the window gets very hot. So what he does is he lies down and sandwiches his little head under the sort of gap of the tube where it's going out the window. He like slides his body under that. We call it baking his brain, and falls asleep. And that is currently what he is. He's completely flat out asleep with his head against the warm pipe. But earlier today, when he realized that my partner was gone all day, which is kind of unusual, she works from home and things like that, he was complaining. He was like, what did you do? Where is she? Okay, 3 more were crawling to shore, gnashing their black and yellow teeth as they came. Epimetheus drew up his sword for another strike. Gia says baked Smudge, yes. He does it like a welcome to my podcast, Cat Chat. He does it like somebody at a sauna. So like he'll bake his head and then suddenly he'll wake up, it'll be too warm. He'll turn the other way where the window is, where it's cooler, and then put his head against the window and cool off. I heard that recently. I heard that one of the theories on how we figured out cheese. Yeah, we talked about this in chat. I'm not repeating this. We already talked about this. Talked about rennet. Yeah, never mind. Anyways, Epimetheus drew up his sword for another strike. But before he could land it, Galen waddled up to the waterline and swung his walking stick lethargically at one of the 3 rats that surrounded him. He missed. Epimetheus grabbed him by the cloak, but not before the vicious rats dragged his stumpy thigh with their infected teeth, incisors. Witchery says, I try not to think about how people discover certain things are edible. I mean, I think ultimately it's more depressing than funny or weird. I think it's just they all were starving. GS says, haha, Rory, that's funny and original. I've never seen a cat video of that. If you want 300,000 views, record Smudge doing that. No, I don't want the cat views. Those are cheap views. You get them once. They don't even care about my writing career. Unlike this, where everyone knows about it and regularly views my website. You missed Epimetheus. He missed. Epimetheus grabbed him by the cloak, pulling him back. Pulling the little fool back. But not before the vicious rats dragged their infected incisors across his stumpy thigh, opening a blossom of a wound. He squealed. Epimetheus tossed him towards, what was the cleric's name? Hubert? Towards Hubert with the instruction to heal him, and turned to see two rats rising for a strike during his moment of distraction. Epimetheus winced, but no hit landed. Instead, there was a soft whistle of two poisoned daggers sailing through the cavern's muggy air and burying themselves into the attacking rats' hearts, chests. No, the attacking rats. They writhed for a moment, but the poison was disturbingly quick. You're welcome, big man. Niece shouted from her cover behind a stalagmite. She says prehistoric times. Hey Greg, eat this brown thing. You get a buzz. I think there's a surprising amount of that. Yeah, if you guys ever want to know about, like, the history of food, I do recommend Max Miller's, why can I not think of the name? Is it Eating History? I'm so bad at recalling names. I watch it every week. Anyways, he's, sort of an amateur food historian, but he does little bits on food and stuff. Anyways, he recently did one on not truly prehistoric, but pretty old, found in the stomach of somebody who was found frozen up in the mountains from a very long time ago. And he talked through, like, the kind of stuff they eat. But a lot of the stuff that we think is mysterious is not all that mysterious. I mean, it's like, why did we eat milk? Well, because we saw children of those animals eating milk, and we were starving. So we just imitated what a calf did. Discovered it was tasty. How did we discover cheese? Like I said before, because we used to carry things around in the stomachs of animals that we slaughtered. And those stomachs, didn't wash them really very much. Had bacteria like rennet that would that would curdle milk. You know, trial and error. Leavened bread. Yeast just exists in the air. So when you have a dough and you don't use it all and you leave it for a day, that yeast grows. You discover that it's a slightly different taste, and it does funny things when you put it on the fire. Eventually you just explore that further. Witchery says he has a book. Yeah, I have the book, actually. It was given to me as a gift. Unfortunately now, I can eat almost none of it. Because Europe is the history of gluten-containing grains. Well, you might witchery if it's that or dying of starvation. I think that's the thing you have to remember. It's not like they sat around cozy and were like, how about we try some milk? It's like, it's this or we all die. Just as I had my DNA done, and I have more Neanderthal than 58% of the general population, yet my sister has only 16%. I see other relatives having more than 90% of the population. Interesting. That's a good point, Witchery. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I've never done my DNA, I think I've mentioned before, because as much as I find the concept interesting and I would like to know that in more detail, without getting too much into it, it is just a big database of genetic information that you trust to whoever buys it next. And I know that at least one of the major ones got bought up by a group that largely made its money being a mercenary group. So that's not who I want to have my genetic information. so I'm not going to do it. I'm not saying anything would come of it. I'm just saying it makes me uncomfortable. Epimetheus gave a quick nod with a thrust down and a cleaving swipe. Then with a thrust down and a cleaving swipe through the head of Final Rat. Off to stain the cavern lake. Witchery says, yeah, I also want a DNA test, but I refuse to give it up. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. People in my family have done it, so I do know some stuff about it, but it's, you know, it's all estimation as to what you got from that. You know, just having that in your line doesn't determine what genes went out. Yeah. All right. Epimetheus spun around, face spattered by the beast's blood, and shouted down at Galen, "Why did you hire us? If you feel you know so much about what you don't." Galen was pale and laid out under the hands of Hubert. Who was stopping the bleeding, who was tending his wound and muttering incantations. GS says, I was adopted, so I wanted to know. Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, I don't know that anything is ever going to come of that. But yeah, enough bad things have happened in the world, especially lately, that I don't really want to be on a DNA registry. Ooh, Lebanese. Good food. I'll say that. I regularly make muhodara, which is green lentils and rice with crispy onions. I make that with a roasted chicken. Yeah, DNA between siblings is not the same. No, DNA is always a bit of a gamble. And indeed, DNA tests are not necessarily what people think they are either. I think it would be important for people to look up exactly what they're telling you before getting them so you know what it means. Because I've seen some people say things that are just not true. Jumpstore says, that doesn't make any sense, GS. If you're full-blooded, you have the exact same ancestors. How could you contain more of a heritage than she does? Because that is how genetics work. You get a big buffet of stuff, but which ones get turned on for you and which ones get turned off is random. Not random, but somewhat randomized. So it's not instinctive at all. So if one person is taking from a family line that had a lot more of whatever than another, then you will come out with a lot more of those genes present. Yes. Yeah. Witchery has said this much easier, in a much simpler way. Yeah, we have a lot of genes, and we don't use a lot of them, actually. Galen was pale and laid on. I think because Galen is the person who hired this and only has 1 health left, I think we're going to have to use that heal spell. We can't let Galen die. Not this early. And he is getting too damn close. So you add 4 HP up to any one character's current total, so we're consuming the spell. I'm not even putting it to a vote. Watch them become... Watch the outrage. I will say that genetics is one of those things where, like, you'll hear a description, you'll go, oh, I understood that. And then you'll, like, say it back to the person who knows genetics really well. I ran into this a few times. And then you'll find out that you didn't understand anything. Yeah. A lot of unsavory people capitalize on that, but I won't go into that here. But yeah. Zombie Wolf says, I'm not even confident that my test would come back as half Sicilian, despite knowing that my grandmother and grandparents are all full Sicilian, and that's because they might have been from... I'm sure the message goes on. But also, like, what it's really doing, because nationalities don't have a genetic code, right? So what it actually does is it looks at an average presence of genes in an area. You know, so predominantly, you know, they've done testing all over, and they've noticed that, you know, predominantly these markers tend to occur in people who were around Sicily. And so then they say, you know, that makes it likely you probably descended from Sicilians, like a lot of the people there, right? But what you'll notice is if you ever do the genetic test, because I know people who've done it and I watched it, your actual, how they define your percentages of nationalities changes as they get more data, right? And one of the tricky things is the people in my family who've done it, it's usually sort of a mix of like Nordic and Scottish, and sometimes even Irish or English, although that's the least of all. And there's a reason for that, which is there was a whole bunch of, over many centuries, there was a whole bunch of like movement of Nords through places like the Orkney Isles in Scotland and so on, all the way over to North America, which created a bunch of blending. And so there's this sort of trail of genetics, of common genetics between all those places. And it's really hard to say quite exactly where you're from. You just know you are a part of that sort of outflow over many centuries from the Nords that eventually wound up into someplace in Manitoba. Yes, Witchery is accurate. I don't think it's full bull, but it is maybe not always telling the story people want to say. Yeah. Because, you know, ultimately, what is genetics but a story of all of us leaving a particular area of Africa, you know, where the heart of civilization occurred, and then we all spread out. So in a lot of ways, genetics is just sort of the story of your path from there to here. And everywhere you transmitted through and where you spent more time will mean that you tend to show up more for that. GS says, let's focus on the story. Okay, we've healed Hubert. Galen was too terrified to respond. Simply nodded at Epimetheus. Zombie wolf, yeah. I'm not going to go into that, but it is, yeah, you are correct. The funny alternate histories of some belief systems. Galen was too terrified to run and simply nodded at Epimetheus. Epimetheus was not keen to be a leader, but he also was not keen to have his benefactor die so soon. He turned to Nice, who was peering out from behind her cover, and said, "That was a good shot. Thank you." You big guys hit hard, but slow. Good to have a short and quick hand in battle, eh? Nice said, searching for further praise. Epimetheus sighed, then cleaned his blade in the lake. Before the group moved on. Okay. Chat, it barely matters, but for the hell of it, if I could have your attention. Our cavern has 3 tunnels out to the next room. The first one is this uppermost, the next one is the one down, and then the southern one. So there's a north, less north, and then a southern tunnel. Which way should we go? A vote for the middle way. Okay. I am pulling the hearts card. I got a king of hearts. Let's make sure that wasn't the same one last time, because I think I put those on the bottom, but maybe I forgot. No, it's not. Okay, it's a prison. Excellent. But there's 2 votes for north and 1 vote for south. So we have a vote for middle, 2 votes for north, 1 vote for south. So north it is. The King of Hearts. I'll remind you, level up happens when after the first 6 turns. You can't do it in the first 6 turns. But after the first 6 turns, you find the Ace of Hearts. Then you go to level 2 of the dungeon. and also level 2 of your characters. That's how level up happens. Oh, now there's 2 votes for south. What? Okay. I gotta flip the coin. We have votes for everywhere. Okay, north or south? Blue is north, red is south. It's blue. North it is. Okay. Witchery says, we need a poll feature on YouTube Live. There is a poll feature, but I think I actually have to have more people subscribe to use it or something. I don't know. YouTube is really weird. I don't understand why you can't just have all their tools available to help you grow your stream, but there are a bunch of restrictions on what you can do. Okay, so it's a King of Hearts. So it's a prison, so it only has one exit. We can rescue a prisoner to A, replace a dead party member of the same class. Well, we don't have a dead party member. Or B, take information that allows players to skip the next monster. Oh, cool. Okay. Well, we'll have to keep that in mind. I don't know where to put that. I guess as an item? Gia says that's for the snazzy streams. I mean, it's possible I can do it. Zombie Wolf says, your number of subscribers keeps growing, though, so that must feel pretty good, at least, Rory. I mean, it does feel good, but I'll be honest. Just having people who consistently want to come here and enjoy themselves is what feels good. You know, if I had 40 subscribers right now, but it was this, you know, you 10 or so folks who show up and participate, I think I'd feel pretty good. Because that's what, you know, the thing about subscriber numbers is it could just be curious people who never watch your stuff again or whatever else. Tree says YouTube doesn't mention a limit. I'm gonna forget. So if somebody remembers, remind me at the end of the stream. Oh, you say, there we are. Okay, let me see if I have this option. Engage with your audience. Start a Q&A. Answer viewers' questions live. Start a poll. All right, well, apparently I have a poll. Let's see what happens if I put a poll in. Ask a question. Why didn't Rory know he had a poll option? Wait, how do I edit these options? Oh, I see what's happening. He was too busy talking to chat. Jumpstore says live streaming for dummies, Rory. Well, obviously, we all know who the dummy is. He is... let's see what happens. How do I get, oh, I get to choose when it ends. Oh, cool. Okay. So far, people are being nice to me. All right. I'm going to carry out the story while we play around with that chat and I make sure I know how it works. Epimetheus aside, then... Witchery says to not distract. Everything distracts me. GS says that would be like a guy reading instructions or asking for directions. I am the guy who reads instructions and asks for directions. I am that dork. I used to make manuals for things, so. Okay, so we have here our prison. Let's make it there. Okay, what should this prison look like? We haven't really decided like what this temple looks like or exactly what they're looking for. Like I sort of left it open where Galen knows kind of what he's doing, but we can discover it as we go. Okay. I'm going to end the poll. What are the end results? 66% said he was too busy talking to chat. And 33% said he has replaced his brain with cheese. Actually, chat is wrong. It's the cheese one. Well, that's good to know. Thank you for that, Witchery. I don't plan to use it too much because, as you've noticed, it's very slow. But I think if we have really crucial decisions, I can use that. Cracking stone walls covered with moss. Okay. Now, we said that that opening cavern was an ancient temple. It had runes on the wall that when he touched it, it opened a portal and let in a bunch of vicious rats. Swiss cheese then, yeah. So what kind of temple is this? Are we doing like an old god thing, like a Cthulhu thing? Or are we doing like you know, an evil temple where they were, you know, trying to summon like Orcus or something like that? I guess is what I'm looking for, because the prison itself, that's going to determine what it is. And we also have to contend with the fact that we've already established this place was closed from the world for an age. So this person has been in prison for an extremely long time and is somehow not dead. Yeah, old gods are good. I mean, old gods is my kind of go-to, my staple. I'm going to let this be a bit more of a discussion, because at this point we do have to kind of determine some of the texture of what we're engaging with here. So I don't want to freewheel over it too quickly. Kept my leg folded for a little too long there. I've picked up doing some exercise with weight again. I use sandbags. And as a result, my legs are seizing quicker from sitting all this time. Shizuka. Yes. Lovely little Shizuka. I've had on my mind demon designs and stuff like that because my partner was rewatching Inuyasha, and I'd never seen it. It was kind of my era, but I didn't really watch it. And you know, only the first few episodes. I'm sure it gets repetitive, but Those early episodes had some very cool ideas for villains. Witchery says, if you listen to the Old Gods of Appalachia, is that the Alan Wake thing? The Alan Wake games? Their house band that they put into things? Alright, we're going with Old Gods then. That was the only opinion expressed. I want to see the new Alien movie. I don't know. I know my chat is kind of meh on Alien, but it looks good. I can't afford to see the new Alien movie because it's like $25 to see a movie in Canada, but yeah. Oh, it's a podcast. Okay. No, I guess I haven't. Epimetheus sighed, then cleaned his blade in the lake before the group moved on down the north tunnel. The walls were more structured here. Dark marble stones stacked with intricate craftsmanship that let through no water or light. Trey says, I'm going to watch Alien for Halloween, I think. I think if you watch the first one, I think if you watch the first one, it's it'll tell you if it's worth it to you to watch anything else. I don't think any of them ever is quite as good as the first one. I was sort of talking about this recently to somebody. Basically, the first one is the one that all Alien fans agree on, to my knowledge anyways. And then after that, it's a big debate about which ones are worth your time or which not. You know, I think probably the second most popular is the sequel, Aliens. I didn't love Aliens because it's basically a James Cameron action movie, whereas the first one is kind of like a stalker slasher flick, but with a big alien. So I preferred the vibes of the first. The third one was David Fincher's directorial debut and rather famously was wrecked by the producers, and none of the original footage remained. So it is a weird, disjointed film that is very well shot, but has many problems. Alien Resurrection is the weirdest high-budget film ever made, I think. Bizarrely directed by the man who would go 2 years later to direct Amelie, which was nothing like it. And then after that, I don't know. I mean, there's things like Alien vs. Predator and stuff. I don't know. It's all kind of campy fun, and then not really my vibe for it. And then we get the very self-serious, lore-heavy Prometheus, which is controversial, I will say, at the very least. I think it's very beautifully shot. I'm kind of meh on the way it structures its plot. I don't know that its reveals are particularly worth how long it takes to get to them. I'm one of the few people that defends the sequel to that, which is Alien Covenant, which a lot of people hated, but I felt like was a gothic horror film, but with an alien, which I think was very cool. And this is the next one after that. Witcher says, I'm less for gore, which is the reason why I never bothered. I wouldn't say it's super gory overall. Like, it has its iconic gory scenes. It definitely shows a lot of blood. Yeah. I mean, it has its moments. It's more body horror than really gruesome. But it's definitely violent. I won't deny that. You know, things rupture and spew blood and whatever else. But I'm not a big gore fan either. The walls were more structured here. Dark marble stones were stacked with intricate craftsmanship, let through no water or light. The air was stale and damp. But little else betrayed the age of this hall. At the end, finally, the tight walls gave way to a large chamber of iron cages stacked to the ceiling on either side of the path. Which says body horror is the problem. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think it... Like, I think the king of body horror is probably the Thing. Well, I guess pretty much anything done by... what's his name? He did The Fly, probably beats everything out. He's the king of body horror, but it's never... I don't think it ever does anything quite as bad as the Thing in terms of body horror. But yeah. I will say that I think part of what makes Alien different is Alien very clearly has a thematic worldview that I feel like you will pick up on. And I think it's well done. I won't expound on it here because it involves sensitive topics, to put it mildly. But it is pretty well done on a thematic level for its story, and it's pretty consistent in the ones that are at least have that director as a person. GS is Carpenter. Well, Carpenter did The Thing. I'm not thinking of him, though. The one who did The Fly. Finally, the tight walls gave way to a large chamber of iron cages stacked to the ceiling on either side of the path. Yeah, I go for suspense. Like, when I was a kid, I really liked Jurassic Park, the original Jurassic Park. Even the sequel I liked. Admittedly, I was like 9, but... because it was more, like, tension than anything else. I like that. The inhabitants of these cages were bits of bone and dust, save for one. At the end of the path, where a creature still stirred. Witchery says Jurassic Park is so good still. Yeah, I had a chance to see it when it came to theaters 10 years ago or so. It's probably even longer than that at this point. When they did a little re-release of it, and it was great. I saw it in IMAX. It was great. I mean, I saw it before that. I used to watch it a lot as a kid. Yeah, there's lots of inaccuracies, but like, I don't know. I think people get too hung up on that. It made a generation interested in dinosaurs. GS says, love Brandon, his dad, Bruce. Yeah, we were talking about the crow there. Bruce is so captivating. You know, there's lots of people who like come out and do the same amount of like karate work, or I guess it wasn't karate with him, but but they just don't have that same sort of intense, captivating drama that he can embody. The physicality of him and all that. The inhabitants of the caves were bits of bone and dust, save for one of the still stirred. Niece paused. Witcher says, I saw Jurassic Park in the theater like in the original run. Couldn't have been more than 4. I saw Jurassic Park as a rental video. My parents let me watch it. I was allowed to watch the whole thing, except the scene with Nedry in the car. I had to leave the room while they fast forwarded that scene. And that was true for a long time, actually, which was funny because I was the kind of kid who would watch the same movie like, well, I was a kid. I think every kid does this, but I would watch the same movie like 50 times. So Jurassic Park was one of those movies. And I've mentioned before, Fievel Goes West was another one of them. But that one was funny because every time we got to that scene, it'd be like, Mom, we have to fast forward. Tammy says, I lost the chat. Is Rory still there? I don't know what you mean. Niece paused. Holding up her hand and whispered, "There's something in the cage ahead. It lives." Impossible. My mom had weird standards about what I could watch, which she says, I watched Silence of the Lambs when I was 7? Well, that's just a bad idea. Couldn't watch Sabrina the Teenage Witch, though. What? Oh, your screen reset. Okay. I can't even imagine that movie being entertaining to a 7-year-old child. Like, yes, it has these horrible, violent things in it, but between that, it's just people talking to each other. That'd be so boring when you're 7. I watched a lot of Sabrina the Teenage Witch when I was growing up. I watched a bit of it again, which is a big mistake, because it wasn't as good as I remembered at all. Oh, that's why. Okay. Yeah, they were Christians. They didn't like the magic. I had a Krishna upbringing, but it was more consistent than that. I wasn't allowed to watch like violent things until I reached a certain age. I was discouraged from the black art stuff. Impossible, Galen shouted, which prompted a wide-eyed and incredulous niece to turn and press as if she couldn't believe someone this dumb was doing something this dangerous. Jumpstore says, Sabrina the Teenage Witch and Charm were my favorite shows when I was little. I never watched Charmed. I was aware of its existence, but I was removed from my class when they did Harry Potter. Yes, definitely a terrible person, but yeah, I was. It created a situation where like I didn't read the books because I was kind of young. It was still like don't engage with witchcraft. But I did watch the movies because at that point I was old enough to make those kind of decisions. I'm glad to have you back, Tammy. Turned towards him as if she couldn't believe someone this dumb was doing something this dangerous. What would Nice say, chat, if Galen just was loud when everyone was obviously trying to be stealthy? See, I can't make that a poll. Also, related question, why would a prisoner still be alive in a place that probably hasn't had an entrance for 1,000 years? They have to be someone that's going to help us, give us info. They're not going to join the party. But what kind of person, what kind of thing is still going to be alive and in a cage? Witchery says immortal wizard. Have to be someone who reasonably couldn't get themselves out of a cage, though, too, right? Zombie Wolf? What do you think Nice would say here? I'm a little, still trying to get a sense of your character here. The cage could be enchanted by the god, maybe? Oh, good point. Good point. Maybe it's some kind of metal it couldn't touch? GS as a regenerator. I like that idea. Tammy says, what about a fairy? Captain Hook kept her in a cage. That's true. Maybe it's some fey creature who can't touch a certain type of metal. Okay. See, I wouldn't have thought of that, Zombie Wolf. That's a good idea. There was a moment where it seemed that Nice might choke Galen into unconsciousness. Witchery says, Faye hate iron. Is iron the one? I couldn't remember. I was like, I know werewolves and silver. But yeah, if it's iron, then we'll go with that. What do you think the personality of this Fae should be? Here, I'll make that a poll. Let's do that. What should the imprisoned Fae be like? Grumpy? Confused. Cheerful. Suspicious. There we go. David Cronenberg. There we go. Could not remember it. I think he's actually Canadian. I've seen almost all of David Cronenberg's movies. And I gotta be honest, I don't think I liked most of them. Even though I do kind of like that. I do like strange abstract cinema, but I used to be a lot more of a film guy. Watched a lot of art films and stuff. Something about him never really lands with me. There was a moment where it seemed that Nice might choke Galen into unconsciousness, but this furrowed face, her furrowed face, resolved into a friendly smile, and she said, "Oh, you're probably right. Go right ahead and touch that cage. Must be an illusion." Zombie Wolf says, "Not The Thing, The Fly." Yeah, The Thing is by Carpenter. I was just talking about body horror. And I said, you know, The Thing is kind of one of the major body horror movies. But overall, I think the king of body horror is probably Cronenberg. And I couldn't remember his name, so I said, you know, the guy did The Fly. Not just for The Fly, like almost every movie he does, even ones that aren't like supernatural, has some element of body horror in it. I'm glad he exists. I just happen not to like a lot of what he made. Make sure you get your vote in. Once we get past this little getting to the cage thing, I'm going to have to give this thing a personality, and that's when I'll end the poll. Must be an illusion. Which, of course, are dispelled by a simple touch. Right? Right, of course. I am a very knowledgeable wizard. And I certainly do not need illusion magic explained to me. Galen said, then confidently strutted forward. Jumpstore says, David Lynch really disturbed me with a Razorhead, though. I really, really like David Lynch. And I actually liked Eraserhead. David Lynch is in my pocket. Like, I like surrealism. It doesn't really come out much in my writing. But I used to write more surrealistic stuff, and then I was like, I don't know if this is what I want to contribute. Like, I didn't feel like that was what I saw. When a lot of the time when you're a creator, it's sort of a mixture of what do you have inside you, and also what do you want to see in the world? What do you want to see more of? And I wanted to see more sort of straightforward stories. Tammy says, check the poll, Rory. Yeah, I'll end it. I'll end it soon. Don't worry. I will end it soon. Yeah, Eraserhead is a really interesting piece about like the fears of newborn children. You know, like a manifestation of the sort of psychic impact of David Lynch trying to come to terms with that. Galen said, then confidently strutted forward. To this day, no one knows what the baby creature was made out of. Galen said, then confidently strutted forward to the cage. Where a small creature fluttered about. I didn't watch Hellraiser until a couple of years ago, and then I liked it fine. It's a little thin on narrative heft, but it was interesting. I think it's a success of like a lot of 80s horror. It succeeds more in its design than I think anything else. Galen said, then confidently strutted forward to the cage where a small creature fluttered about. Can't fool me, Galen said, swinging his hand at the iron bars with the full expectation that it all was as impermeable, or not impermeable, as immaterial as a thought. I think that's a good way to put it, GS. Yeah, I agree with your analysis, Jumpstore. I think it was such a creative way. Like, as some people have said, it's demonizing, you know, the idea of becoming a parent and stuff. But I think you're right that it's about it's taking that kind of Lovecraft thing where you take your fears and you turn them into monsters. And there's so many fears when you have children, I imagine. I don't have children. I'm not going to have children. But for my friends who have children. But it it was a really cool application of that idea, of that experience. And GS says, Lynch is somewhat relatable. Cronenberg, not so much. I agree. I think Cronenberg makes the dubious choice to never have an audience insight character. Like, that was my complaint with Crash, which is a movie I really didn't like. Not the Crash that got a bunch of Academy Awards. It came out a couple of years before that in the late 90s. I'll let you look up the synopsis for obvious reasons when you look it up. I'm not going to explain it on stream. I did not like that movie at all. It was one of the movies I hated, actually. Again, personal opinion. That's not really a judgment on its quality. But the thing that I really didn't like was there was no real insert character. The lead character was kind of that way. And the problem was then I was watching a movie where people just said weird things like Dark Souls NPCs, but I never knew what was going on. And then just something creepy would happen, or gross, and then a bunch of people would be sort of doing a mumblecore thing where they were standing in a room together. No one ever really moved much. And they would just say more weird, completely alien things that I could not parse. And I just didn't know why I was watching it. Some of his later stuff, though, I do like. I will say. I say later to me, which is probably like 15 years old. Of course, as Nice had determined already, this was no illusion. So, instead, Galen smacked his hand against the iron bars and gave a pained wail when he did so. The creature inside fluttered awake from a small perch and said, and now I'm ending the poll. Most were voting for suspicious. Okay. Who are you? Ooh. Old man. Are you of their cult? Awakened to see if my resolve has faded? Well, nay, I say. What is a century to the Fae? But a breath and a heartbeat. I shall tell you nothing, foul cultists. It speaks! Galen shouted, still holding his bruised hand. I have lost track of what we're talking about, so I'm not going to participate. Tammy asked, do you like Twilight? It's one of my favorites. I don't. I didn't get along with Twilight, but I will say I think people were way too hard on it. They treated it like it was trying to be something it's not. I guess that kind of happens when people... when something gets really popular, like it feels like it's being forced on you. And so then people feel the need to do a lot of pushback. But I'll defer to the many people who've talked about how it was you talked about how like a lot of things have been said about it that could be said about a lot of properties, right? Oh, what's her name? The essayist that left YouTube, but one of the original sort of pop culture essayists. Used to watch her all the time. She recently did a Yoko Ono video. Can't think of her name right now. Somebody in chat will know it. She did a very good video that I think does a good job sort of expressing, you know, even if you didn't like the book, the reaction to it wasn't good. I've already told this story several times, but I may as well tell it again since it came up and we're almost at the end of the stream. Twilight was filmed around where I live. And so that meant when they were filming the Twilight, it's sometimes very close to where I was living at the time. Lindsay Ellis, that's right. Anyways, when I was During that era, when they were filming the films in our area, especially when I was younger, I could kind of pass for the lead, Robert Pattinson, to enough people that it came up a lot. And there was a period of time when they were sort of filming all those sequels kind of back to back, and he was known to be in town a lot. Where every time I went out in general to the public, there would be somebody who would come up and be like, "Are you Robert Pattinson?" I think I can kind of see. I used to have short hair then too. Really, until the pandemic, I had short hair. And at this point, it just feels like a sunk cost to get rid of. But anyways, and the most iconic one of that, which all my friends know, which I have told on stream before, was I was at our local like big theme park. And I was swinging around on the swings, and I noticed that a group of young girls had gathered at a fence line and were pointing up. And I thought, that's weird. I guess they want to get on the ride, because there's lots of us on there. And then we got off, and their mother came up and said, "It's my daughter's birthday. Are you Robert Pattinson?" I think I left out the birthday thing last time I told this story, and I was like, no. I'm sorry to disappoint your daughter, but I am a boring person who no one knows. But I used to work in a video store, and I was working in a video store when the first movies came out, I believe. And then it just, with everyone who was renting that video, they're like, "Oh, you look like Robert Pattinson." I don't, though. That's the thing. I don't really look like him. I look like him, sort of. Noted, Rory was a hottie with a killer jaw and zero skin pigment. Relative to my family, probably doesn't show up here. Relative to my family, I'm actually relatively dark-skinned. Which none of my history made sense of that we knew, and then somebody in my family got the GNA test, and we discovered that there is a bit of Cree, swampy Cree blood in me, and I think that's where the just slight swarthiness is coming from, because it's certainly not coming from the Scottish, and it's not coming from the Nordic. Yeah. Anyways, I guess what I'll sort of repeat what the first time somebody asked us about this, which was on Big Van Book Club, which is a series I would like to get back to with Avalon. Somebody asked us, do writers hate Twilight because it's got a lot of writing flaws in it, and the answer is no. The general opinion of writers when you talk to them, most of us don't really like it. But most of us recognize what it is and are happy that a story gave a lot of people joy. I don't think much is gained from berating people for liking a story like that. It speaks, Galen shouted, still holding his bruised hand. Oh, said Nice, said with a notable sarcastic tone. That's so unusual for an illusion to start a conversation. Still rubbing his hand. Yeah, I think a lot of problematic things were like around Twilight. I think that's true. I think it's also true that there's questionable politics in it, but there's like questionable politics. To take Lindsay Ellis's point, there's questionable stuff in the Transformers movies, but they don't get berated, right? Ralph Fiennes told a similar story on Conan. I think I did hear this, where he kept getting mistaken for Liam Neeson. He met a couple of fans who were about to sign his signature, and they said, "We loved you in Taken." I guess I could see that. He wrote Liam Neeson instead of his name. There's somebody, I forget who the pairing is. I think it's you know me and names, folks. The actor who played Frodo, I think, said he gets mistaken a lot for somebody else, and they just sign each other's names at this point. Galen turned with a serious expression and said, "Oh, my dear, I have determined this is no illusion, but rather a fae." Daniel Radcliffe. Oh, that would make sense, yeah. Which goes to show, like, when people mistake things for people, it's like, it's more like they think you embody an energy, right? Like, because they don't look the same, you know, but they do occupy the sort of chosen person in a fantasy, so your brain kind of sorts them together. And I think I just was kind of stoic and quiet as a person in general in public. That I think gives that vibe, and then I slightly resembled Robert Pattinson, especially when I was younger, and I didn't have the beard. Man, Daniel Radcliffe has had just a wild career. Like, he could have really been pigeonholed, and he just refused to, and he does the strangest, most interesting movies. I'm so proud of him, even though I played no role in it. He doesn't owe me anything, but I'm proud of him for, like, not for just doing what he wanted, right? He broke the sort of massive child star mold. Hubert ignored the smug niece and the aloof. Galen. They do share a vibe. Yeah, they do. Yeah, Swiss Army Man. Like, I'm not saying they're all bangers, but they're all very original and creative. Like, he's certainly not cashing in, and he didn't, like, collapse on himself or whatever else. Like, it's good. I'm glad. He's had fun with his life, and he deserves it. Because, you know. And as I understand it, that was sort of by design. When they were putting together those movies, they wanted to make sure that they didn't do that to another group of child actors, as it had normally been. Yeah, true witchery. Yeah. Hubert ignored the smug niece and the aloof Galen. Choosing instead to step forward, lean down, and ask, "How came you to be imprisoned so long, little fairy?" I would die if I met any of the Lord of the Rings cast. Put on my grave that I held their hand. Well, I mean, I have in a sense. They come to fan expos. I've seen them around. I try not to harass people too much. You know what kind of ruined it? I've mentioned before, I was a medic who did a lot of, like, events for a long time. And I got backstage as staff around a lot of famous people. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again, and it's not an original thing to say. don't meet people that are famous that you like. They're not who you want them to be. Their job is to be charismatic. You really cannot trust the image you have. The thing that tells you the most about who a person is the staff, like the grips and camera people that work with them. They talk about them backstage and stuff, and that's how you find out who is actually a decent person and who isn't. Though I will say the feedback on a lot of the cast from Lord of the Rings was very positive. A lot of nice people there. Yeah, there's lots of like illusions I could shatter here by telling you my experiences, even brief ones with some famous musicians and stuff, and they're just jerks. Like, a lot of them are very arrogant. Anyways, I want to do an ability check. It's not called for, but I want to do an ability check here to see if Hubert comes across as trustworthy to this suspicious little fairy. So on a blue, he succeeds. On a red, he doesn't. Whoop. I dropped it. He does not succeed. Everyone loves Vigo. Yeah, Vigo is someone who I've heard good feedback on. I was lucky enough to be like in circles where you would meet people who've worked on, you know, stuff, because a lot of stuff gets filmed in Vancouver with a lot of famous people. Like, I can say I think everyone knows it at this point, but like Keanu Reeves is apparently as nice as he seems. Like, nobody has ever said a bad thing to me about him, and he did some filming around here. But there were some bands I liked that I like less now. I'll say that every DJ I've ever had the misfortune of being backstage around, because I have to be around. It's not like I'm bothering them. I don't talk to them. I just watch how they act. Has been an absolute jerk. Hubert ignored the smug niece and the aloof Galen, choosing instead to step forward, lean down, and ask. The fairy fluttered into the light. Its dragonfly wings. Casting color. Yeah, I'll admit I don't really know much about Kane Brown, Tammy, but I certainly hope he is who he presents. And looked carefully at the humble face of the cleric. No, not all of them are jerks, but I will say that there is very little that tells you ahead of time who's going to be the jerk. I mean, the ones that act like jerks in public are generally also jerks backstage, but like, you know, a lot of, for example, I'm not a big fan of country music, but a lot of country musicians were really kind of nice. which I didn't expect. And then a bunch of rock stars that I knew of, from not personally knew, were smug, demanding children. Jess says, we want to have our heroes. Yeah, that's why I'm not really naming the negatives, because you're probably never going to meet them. And that's fine. You know, their job is not to be the nicest people in the world. I mean, I hope they're not so horrible they're doing felonies and crimes, but, you know, their job is to be entertainers. And if something entertains you, just don't pursue the personality. They're probably not very nice. Witchery says, Johnny Cash was troubled but good people. My impression is it depends on when you knew Johnny Cash, right? You know, what drugs was he addicted to? How was his life going? Look carefully at the humble face of the cleric. With a creeping smile on its small but youthful face, it said, "Oh, you think you got me in your hand with that honey? Honey, holy man. Well, I am older than your bloodline, and I know a trick when I see it. Ha!" Hubert recoiled from this comment as if a hail of arrows had sunk into his soft heart. He sputtered and denied the claim, but it was Nice who shoved him aside and said, "Look, you little grump, you can't touch iron, and so you spent a year, a millennia in Millennium? Millennium. What is your problem? What do you mean, spelling? You don't know the word millennium? Am I just spelling this that wrong? It's right? Or is it two N's? Is it really can't recognize two N's? Like, that's not fixable. Tammy says, my daughter saw a list of famous people that are nice and jerks in real life. I was quite surprised by the list for sure. Yeah. Yep. I would say that, you know, the thing that, I'll tell you another one who was a really genuinely nice person when they didn't have to be. I can't really specify why, because it infringes on some privacy stuff that was a part of my old job, but Martin Short is a really nice guy. But, you know, like his comedy might give you the impression that he's a bit acidic, or acerbic rather. But no, he's very kind, very soft-spoken when he's not performing. That's a good point, Jump Store. Some people really tell you who they are. Look, you little grump, you can't touch iron, and so you spent a millennium in the dark. And you're going to spend another millennium Jump Store says, I'll tell you what, that list ruined my childhood. Yeah, indeed. Watching spiders weave webs and die. If you don't help us in some way. Why should I help you? The fairy retorted. Because I don't care what happens to you. But I might if you have value to me. Niece hissed. I like that phrasing, Witchery. Has some thoughts that should have stayed internal. I will say that sometimes, you know, you got to be careful about, like, are you coming from multiple sources, right? Like, the people that I've mentioned that were good were not just people that I had good experiences with. It was people that I know other people did as well in the industry. Sometimes, though, it depends on the context. Like, I know a lot of hay was made about Christian Bale, for example, yelling at that guy on set when he was doing the Terminator movie, if you're old enough to remember this. But I'll be honest, as somebody who's worked on movie sets, he was right. And I don't know why the director wasn't managing his set. And it's kind of unfortunate that he was put in a position to do that. There are other people who yell on sets that are being jerks, but I don't really think... I think the reaction he got was for people who didn't really understand the context of what was happening and what was normal for a set. That shouldn't be happening. Okay, because I don't care what happens to you, but I might if you have value to me, Niece hissed. The fairy squinted its little eyes, then said, I can tell you how to know if one of the worst beasts in this place is coming. One you would never want to fight because you could not win. But you have to let me out. Swear it, and I'll swear it. Niece responded, raising her eyebrow. I swear on my fey blood that I shall give the info I have promised with no undue delay if you open my iron cage. The fairy said in a rehearsed way. Aye. Open it, Epimetheus. Niece said with a snap of her fingers, but keeping her gaze fixed on the little creature. Oh, really, Witchery? I didn't know that. It's a weird position to take for her. Niece said with a snap of her fingers, but keeping her gaze fixed on the little creature. You're right next to it. Next to the latch, niece. Why do you need me? The lurking warrior grumbled. My hands are occupied, she answered, drawing up her 2 daggers. With our insurance plan. Epimetheus then opened the latch on the iron cage and loosed the little fairy. It gave a few brief hints as to how to notice and distract the beast that lurked on this level. And then buzzed off back the way they had come. And presumably out into the forest beyond. The party moved forward. Okay. You know, the thing about Roseanne is it's sad because, like, I find that there's a tendency when somebody kind of loses it or becomes weird like that to go like, well, they were never good. But that's not true. She was quite good. She came up out of the comedy scene. She was very successful there. Really knows how to structure a joke. She wasn't like my favorite or anything, but she was very good. And then she just sort of fell apart. It's hard to say exactly what happened, but even I was watching some of her recent special just out of morbid curiosity, and it's like, it's just a lost person. Yeah, I agree. There's something else there. I know that she's had some issues with her mental health in the past, and I wonder if that might be the case. But yeah, a lot of them, like, you know, yeah, Rob Schneider went that direction, but like, was Rob Schneider ever good? Not really. Like, it's not that surprising. But yeah, something's off with her. I feel for her because she's really, really very clearly lost. Anyways, GS says, time for your fun trivia, zombie. Yeah, indeed. I'm going to read back what we came up with. I'm going to do it from where we started. I'm not going to read it all from the beginning. But I actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put up a quick poll. I think I know what the answer is going to be, but let's do this. I will say this poll is not definitive. It's me kind of trying to get a feel for where the group is at. I can't remember its name. Let me just check something really quick. Sorry for the dead air, folks. I'll be wrapping up and reading back what we came up with in a minute. Should have thought of this ahead of time, but here we are. Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember now. Okay. There we go. Okay, what should... I'm pretty sure I know what people are going to go for. I'm going to put a poll up for what we should do next week. Okay. While I read this back, there's a poll up asking what should we play next week. Get your votes in. If you don't know any of these, that's fine. But let me read back what we came up with. I'm gonna turn off my air conditioning again. If you're coming to this part of the show, it's because you just want to know what we came up with. And what we came up with was furthering our game of One Shot in the Dark, which is an Ultra Rules Light sort of D&D dungeon crawler. And we sort of built a team last week. I read out the text from last week at the beginning of the stream, so I'm going to start us up from where we sort of started creating new stuff again. But if you want to hear the beginning of the story, you can either go to the beginning of the stream and hear it, or you can listen to last week's show. So we're going to start from where we were in the cavern when they first entered. Galen whipped up into a careless ecstasy because he was not as experienced as his hirees with exploring living relics. He ran to the nearest wall, and before each of his compatriots could scream a chorus of warning, he ran his pudgy, mustard-stained forefinger down the groove of a hewn rune in the wall. It immediately burned with red fire that spread across the visible ruins of the wide space. For a breath, there was nothing more than that. Then the wide chamber filled with sickly twisting light. The source was a cerulean portal glowing from under the cavern lake ahead. It dimmed, and again the cave went dark. Bursting forth from the clear waters came pustule-ridden rats, possessed by hunger and rage. Epimetheus stepped forward and drew his long silver blade. He grunted, "Stay back." "Oh, I'll be fine," Galen chuckled. "I practiced for this in the Adventuring in You seminar. Why, it's just a few rats who are nothing more than a bit larger than normal." Epimetheus plunged his silver blade down with a stomp. There was a crunch and a squeal as the rat, big as a hound, was skewered to its death. 3 more were crawling from the shore, gnashing their black and yellow teeth as they came. Epimetheus drew up his sword for another strike, but before he could land it, Galen waddled up to the waterline and swung his walking stick lethargically at one of the 3 rats that surrounded him. He missed. Epimetheus grabbed him by the cloak, pulling the little fool back, but not before the vicious rats dragged their infected incisors across his stumpy thigh, opening a blossom of a wound. He squealed, and Epimetheus tossed him towards Hubert with the instruction to heal him, and turned to see 2 rats rising for a strike during this moment of distraction. Epimetheus winced, but no hit landed. Instead, there was a soft whistle. There was the soft whistle of 2 poisoned daggers sailing through the cavern's muggy air and burying themselves into the attacking rats. They writhed for a moment, but the poison was disturbingly quick. "You're welcome, big man," Nice shouted from her cover behind the stalagmite. Epimetheus gave a quick nod, then with a thrust down and a cleaving swipe threw the head of the final rat off to stain the cavern lake. Epimetheus spun round, face still spattered by the beast's blood, and shouted down at Galen, "Why did you hire us if you feel you know so much about what you clearly don't?" Galen was pale and laid out under the hands of Hubert, who was tending his wounds and muttering incantations. Galen was too terrified to respond and simply nodded at Epimetheus. Epimetheus was not keen to be a leader, but he also was not keen to have his benefactor die so soon. He turned to Nice, who was peering out from behind her cover, and said, "That was a good shot, thank you." "You big guys hit hard, but slow. Good to have a short and quick hand in battle, eh?" Nice said, searching for further praise. Epimetheus sighed, then cleaned his blade in the lake before the group moved on down the north tunnel. The walls were more structured here. Dark marble stones were stacked with intricate craftsmanship that let through no water or light. The air was stale and damp, but little else betrayed the age of this hall. Finally, the tight walls gave way to a large chamber of iron cages, stacked to the ceiling on either side of the path. The inhabitants of these cages were bits of bone and dust, save for one at the end of the path where a creature still stirred. Nice paused, holding up her hand, and whispered, "There's something in the cage ahead. It lives." "Impossible!" Galen shouted, which prompted a wide-eyed and incredulous Nice to turn towards him as if she couldn't believe someone this dumb was doing something as dangerous as delving into a 1,000-year-old ruin under a mountain at a moment. There was a moment where it seemed that Nice might choke Galen into unconsciousness, but her furrowed face resolved into a friendly smile, and she said, "Oh, you're probably right. Go right ahead. Go touch that cage. Must be an illusion, which of course are dispelled by a simple touch, right?" "Right, of course. I am a very knowledgeable wizard, and I certainly do not need illusion magic explained to me," Galen said, then confidently strutted towards the cage where a small creature fluttered about. "Can't fool me," Galen said, swinging his hand at the iron bars with the expectation that it was as immaterial as a thought. Of course, as Nice had determined already, this was no illusion. So instead, Galen smacked his hand against the iron bars and gave a pained wail when he did so. The creature inside fluttered awake from a small perch and said, "Who are you, old man? Are you of their cult?
Awaken to see if my resolve is faded. Well, nay, I say, what is a century to a fay but a breath and a heartbeat? I shall tell you nothing, foul cultist.
It speaks! Galen shouted in fear, still holding his bruised hand. Oh, Nice said with a notable sarcastic tone, that's so unusual for an illusion to start a conversation. Still rubbing his hand, Galen turned with a serious expression and said, Oh, my dear, I have determined this is no illusion, but rather a fey. Hubert ignored the smug Nice and the aloof Galen, choosing instead to step forward, lean down, and ask, How come you to be in prison so long, little fairy? The fairy fluttered into the light, its dragonfly wings streaking with fluctuating colors as they buzzed, and looked carefully at the humble face of the cleric. With a creeping smile on its small but youthful face, it said,
Oh, you think you got me in your hand with that honey, holy man? Well, I am older than your bloodline, and I know a trick when I see it. Ha!
Hubert recoiled from this comment, as if a hail of arrows had sunk into his very soft heart. He sputtered and denied the claim, but it was Nice who shoved him aside and said, Look, you little grump, you can't touch irons, so you spend a millennium in the dark, and you're going to spend another millennium watching spiders weave webs, then die if you don't help us in some way. Why should I help you? The fairy retorted. Because I don't care what happens to you, but I might if you have value to me, Nice hissed. The fairy squinted its little eyes and then said, I can tell you how to know if one of the worst beasts in this place is coming. One you would never want to fight because you could not win, but you have to let me out. Swear it, and I'll swear it, Nice responded, raising her eyebrow. I swear on my fey blood that I shall give the info I have promised with no undue delay if you open my iron cage, the fairy said in a rehearsed way. Aye, open it, Epimetheus, Nice said with a snap of her fingers, and keeping her gaze fixed on the little creature. You're right next to the latch, Nice. Why do you need me? The lurking warrior grumbled. My hands are occupied, she answered, drawing up her 2 daggers, with our insurance plan. Epimetheus then opened the latch on the iron cage and loosed the little fairy into the dark room. It gave a few brief hints as to how to notice and distract the beasts that lurked on this level. It then buzzed back the way they had come, and presumably out into the forest beyond the fissure. The party, for its part, moved forward. All right. Random trivia from Zombie Wolf. Italians have their own unlucky day similar to Friday the 13th. Tuesday the 17th. The reason why the number 17th is considered unlucky is because the Roman numerals for 17 can spell the Latin word vixi, which implies I lived. Lived as in the past tense, implying the person is no longer alive. Wow, that's convoluted. And random number 2. Alligator mothers actually raise and protect their young for up to 2 years, during which time she teaches them how to hunt, survive, and this is why people think alligators can be slightly safe pets, as opposed to crocodiles. How interesting. Witchery says Galen is secretly a took. That's true, isn't it? Not intentional. Jumpstore is going to let us know if the Crow reboot's any good. I mean, it. Crow is all vibes, so hopefully it is. Ending the poll. What did we wind up with? Unsurprisingly, the floating bookshop. Although the solar punk one got a lot more votes than I expected. So maybe I'll do that one again after. All right. Well, it's hot in this room, and that means it is time for me to go. Thank you so much, Zombie Wolf, Tammy, Witchery, Jumpstore, GS, anybody who's been out there lurking. If you want to try this game yourself, I should have it a pinned comment below. I believe it's like $1.50. But if you want something a little crunchier, I will say Ironsworn is pretty good. And there is a website. You know what? I'm going to put the website up. Give me a second. This isn't going to mean much to anybody but me, but there it is. You can get Ironsworn for free on itch.io, which isn't this game, by the way. But there's this wonderful resource if you choose to play it that I just put in the chat, which is automates a bunch of the tracking and stuff that the game involves. It is a crunchier version of a Dungeon Delver. And it is a lot of fun. So if you're looking for something a little more rule heavy than this, then that would be what I would recommend. It's a similar feel otherwise. But if you like something a little more rule light, I think this is an excellent game. I will be coming back to this at some point, but it looks like next week we'll probably be doing Floating Bookshop. And that is one that you should probably watch the 3 previous episodes we've already done, at least to hear the story, so you get a sense of our little fox and his floating bookshop. Anyways, Jumpstore says, thanks for voting for Floating Bookshop again. I'm still on the fence as to whether I should be doing... The season that we have to do next is kind of maybe more September-ish, but I don't know. I feel like doing it maybe a little sooner. I know you can't have gluten, but it's thought that counts, right? It is the thought that counts, especially since I can't actually reach it anyways. You can make good gluten-free cupcakes, but they do taste different. You can make terrible ones. That's the default. But, yeah. Anyways, it's enough chatting from me. And as for you, I mean, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Get out of my shop.